I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in America I'm John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always are happily ever after.
Long ago and far away in a remote village, there once lived two men. One was the richest man in the village, and the other was the poorest. But although there was such a difference between them, these two men were fast friends. The poor man often worked for the rich man to keep his family fed and clothed. All was well between them until a famine ravaged the country, and the poor man found that once his few crops had failed, he could not feed his family. His three sons checked their emergency store of grain, but it had long since been eaten. Not only was there no harvest this year, but the reserves from last year's poor harvest had disappeared. Nothing but hunger confronted the whole family. Search and beg as he would, the poor man could find no food to feed his family. In great distress, he appealed to his dear friend to help them out in their time of need. But the rich man swore that he too was hard pushed to find the next meal for his own family. "If I feed your family, what will happen to mine?" he demanded. He was adamant in his refusals, and so the poor man turned sadly away. The poor man's wife had managed to gather together a little bit of maize as a payment for working in the fields of her neighbours. Despite all her hard work, what she had been given barely covered the bottom of her pot. The poor man saw the meagre portion, and so, thinking to show his rich friend that they really were as poor as they said they were, he told his wife to set the pot outside the rich man's door. "My family," he told them, "try and pretend we are enjoying a feast such as our friend is enjoying at this very moment. He is sampling a savoury stew thick with meat and gravy. Let us eat our meal so that we can smell the delicious aromas coming from his hut, and let us at least pretend that we are eating such a satisfying dish." A few days later, the poor man told his erstwhile friend what he and his family had done, hoping to make his point in a joking manner. But But the rich man took the matter very seriously, swearing that his dinner that night had been quite tasteless. He accused the poor man of stealing the flavour of his dinner and stormed off to the Council of Elders to accuse the poor man of theft. Concerned for their father, the poor man's 3 sons hastily consulted their wise teacher, who had taught them all he knew. He listened gravely as they told him the whole story, and he agreed to speak up on their father's behalf at the next Indaba, where the case would be discussed. And knowing how poor the man was, he refused to accept any fee for his services. All the important villagers and elders attended the Indaba to hear about the curious case of the rich man's dinner and its stolen flavour. The rich man graphically described how he had been robbed. "What is food without its flavour?" he demanded, and all the villagers nodded their heads in agreement. But the poor man protested that he had not eaten the food, he had merely smelt the food's aroma, and surely such aromas were free to everyone. But while their elders argued this way and that, the rich man's daughter and the poor man's son seized the opportunity, so long denied them, of looking longingly at each other once more. The verdict, however, made the young man's heart sink even further, for the elders decreed that the poor man had stolen the rich man's food and should pay his rich friend a whole goat in compensation. But before the judgment could be carried out, the wise teacher rose to his feet and demanded to have his say. "You maintain that the poor man did not actually steal the food, but only its smell?" he inquired, and everyone nodded in agreement. "Then surely the same should be asked of his payment to the rich man," suggested the teacher, and again everyone nodded, although most didn't understand what he was talking about. The chief judge, after hearing the teacher's argument, reversed his decision. The teacher took hold of the goat and led it to the middle of the room, and the animal promptly started bleating with fear. "Did you hear that bleat?" he asked. The rich man nodded, puzzled. "Then take the sound of the goat in payment for the smell of the food," the chief ordered. The rich man was furious at having such a trick played on him, but the other villagers thought it was a huge joke and clapped and laughed. And the leader of the elders, realizing how unjust they had been to the poor man, ordered the rich man to pay his friend 4 bags of gold to make up for his greed and hard-heartedness. Now that they had last owned some gold of their own, the poor man and his wife decided they must give their sons a chance to get on in the world. So the wife gave each son 1 bag of gold and told them to go and seek their fortune in the wide world outside their small village. "Do not return until each of you has turned your 1 bag of gold into 4, she instructed them. The 2 eldest boys were most reluctant to have the youngest son go with them, and begged that he should stay behind with her and their father while they shared his gold between them. But their mother insisted that all 3 should be given an equal chance. There was no gainsaying her, so the next morning the 3 young men left their village to find their fortune in the wide world outside. The 2 oldest hurried out, trying to put as much distance as possible between them and their brother. On and on they walked until they came to a river and saw some men fishing there. As they drew nearer, they saw a man sitting on the bank displaying his catch. The fish certainly looked very tasty, but the young men didn't want to have much of a burden to carry on such a hot day. "Sell your catch to our youngest brother lagging behind us," they told the man. "Just tell him that if he doesn't buy your fish, you will send him back to his mother." And off they hurried, laughing at their joke. So when the young man reached the fisherman, that is exactly what he was told. "I want 1 bag of gold for my catch," the man demanded, "or I'll send you back to your mother." Well, the young man didn't want to be sent home in disgrace, so he gave the man his bag of gold in exchange for the catch and trudged off after his brothers in the hot sun. The fish became heavier and heavier as the day wore on, and he was often tempted just to drop them there and then. But if he did, he knew his brothers would send him back home, and he was determined to make his fortune in the wide world. At last he found his brothers taking their ease by a fire. "What took you so long?" they cried, and immediately relieved him of the fish, and began to cook them without another word. They certainly smelt good, but when the fish were ready, all the young man got was a fish head, while the other 2 guzzled the fat bodies. How they laughed at their gullible young brother as he quietly picked what flesh he could from the head. But he had the last laugh, for caught between the fish's jaws, he saw a gleaming nugget of gold which he hastily and quietly slipped into his pouch without his brothers being any the wiser. No wonder he was so happy with his meagre portion of food. The moment they finished their meal, the 2 elder brothers jumped up and hurried off to put as much distance as possible between them and the youngest one. And although the day was hot and the sun beat down unmercifully on their heads, they still kept going at a cracking pace, determined to find the place where they would make their fortune. At last, they came to a small village stuck in the middle of nowhere. "Who knows?" the brothers told each other doubtfully. "Fortunes have been found in more unlikely places." So they hurried towards it as their youngest brother stumbled on wearily behind them. The very first person they encountered was an old woman holding a handsome young cockerel. When she saw the 2 fine young men arrive, she immediately called them over to her, offering to sell them this bird. They certainly didn't want to be bothered with such an awkward burden, but the woman insisted, pointing out that it would make a delicious meal as it was young and plump. "We won't buy it," they declared. "You must sell it to our younger brother. Tell him if he doesn't buy it, we shall beat him and send him back to his mother." Laughing at their joke, they hurried on. So the moment the youngest brother appeared in the village, the old woman confronted him. "If you don't buy my cockerel for a piece of gold, your brothers will beat you and send you back to your mother," she threatened the young man. So once again he had to make a purchase against his will. But what could he do? But he hadn't walked 5 paces carrying the cockerel when the village chief stopped him. "What fine feathers that bird has!" the chief exclaimed. "They would make a handsome headdress for me. How much will you sell it for?" 2 bags of gold, the young man promptly demanded. "Done," said the chief, and the exchange was made. Delighted with his good fortune, the young man hurried after his brothers to tell them of his luck. But they saw him hurrying, so they too increased their pace. Anything so that they didn't have to travel together. Very soon they came to another small village where they thought they would find their fortune. But instead they found a man sitting by his hut holding a small cat. "Buy my cat," he cried to the 2 young men. She's a very good mouser, and you will never see another rat or mouse with her around." "What would we do with a cat?" the two brothers demanded scornfully. "Sell her to our youngest brother trailing after us. Tell him that if he doesn't buy your cat, we shall beat him and send him home to his mother." So once again the young man found that he had to make a purchase against his will, paying 1 bag of gold for the puss. At least he still had a bag left, he thought. But no sooner had he picked up the cat than he was stopped by an old man who begged, "How much will you sell your cat for? My hut is plagued with rats and mice." "I shall only sell her for 2 bags of gold," replied the young man. "Done," said the old man, and the exchange was made. Now, the 2 older brothers had watched this incident and were furious that their stupid brother was finding his fortune all right, while they, the clever ones, still only possessed 1 bag of gold each. Still, that didn't give him the right to travel with them, so they hurried along, trying to put as much distance as possible between them and their brother. They soon left the village behind and found themselves travelling along a wild and deserted track that wound its way through thick bushes and trees. Suddenly, a band of fierce-looking men jumped out in front of them. The brothers quaked in fear. "We're poor men," they cried. "If you have something to sell, our younger brother will buy it. Look, he's just behind us and he carries plenty of gold. Just tell him that you'll beat him up and send him home to his mother." So the ruffians laid in wait for the youngest brother, who realized immediately that once again he had no say in what he was asked to buy. "But I insist on seeing what I am buying first," he declared. So the gang leader led him into the bushes, where he showed him the body of a man. "A corpse!" the young man cried. "What on earth can I do with a corpse?" "That's your problem," the robber snarled. "All I want from you is 1 bag of gold for this fine body." What else could the young man do? He handed the gold over and was left puzzling over his latest purchase. Apart from anything else, all the excitement of the day, combined with the many miles he had travelled, had made him feel very hungry. So, seeing a village nearby, he decided he would first buy himself a decent meal and then try and find a solution to his latest problem. But nobody in the village seemed interested in selling him any food, even when he showed them his gold. It was most strange. They wouldn't so much as speak to him. In desperation, he stood foursquare in front of a villager and demanded to know why everyone was behaving so strangely. The man explained sadly, "Our beloved chief died recently, and his body has disappeared. Until it has been restored to us, we shall not eat or work." "But I have your chief's body," the young man cried, and told them of the small grove of trees where the body lay. The first thing the villagers did was to make sure their chief was sent to meet the spirits of his ancestors in a manner fitting to such a great man. But after all the funeral ceremonies had been duly carried out, the villagers realized that, although they had honored their dead chief, they now did not have a living one to guide and lead them. who better to do this than the young man who had found their chief when everyone else had failed? So, without further ado, they dressed him in the chief's leopard skin robe and solemnly greeted him as their new chief. Needless to say, the moment the new chief's two brothers heard about his good fortune, they hastened to the village to make sure that they would get a share of his wealth and power. They were as quick in returning as they had been previously in hurrying away. Their brother welcomed them, but warned them that now they would have to obey him, or I shall have you beaten and sent back to your mother. As soon as the new chief had been properly instated in his village, he returned to his home to claim the rich man's daughter as his bride. She was overjoyed to marry the man she had always loved, while the rich man, who could not contemplate his daughter marrying a poor man's son, was quite happy for her to marry a chief, even although he was the same person. And now, as a condition of our marriage, the chief decreed, my father and my wife's father must renew their friendship. Let them live once more in peace and harmony, as a symbol for all our people. The wedding party was the first of many reasons for the villagers to celebrate the beauty and the wisdom of their new king and queen.